Thank you for joining me today. We're going to talk in detail about one of the biggest geopolitical crises of the 21st century, Russia's invasion of Ukraine, how the United Kingdom has responded militarily, diplomatically and economically, what this says about British military power compared to Russia, and what it all costs. This is a deep dive into facts, figures, strategic realities, and real performance on the ground, so let's get into it. On February 24, 2022, Russia launched a full-scale invasion of Ukraine. This was the culmination of years of tension following Russia's 2014 annexation of Crimea. That invasion not only triggered a humanitarian catastrophe in Ukraine, but it also fundamentally changed how nations like the United Kingdom view security in Europe. Millions of Ukrainians have been displaced, lives and towns destroyed, and the conflict has become a central issue for NATO and Western alliances. Independent Commission for Aid Impact. Britain has been one of Ukraine's most consistent and vocal supporters. The UK government has repeatedly stated that its own security is linked to the outcome of this war, and it has committed resources, military, financial, and diplomatic, to support Ukraine's defense and resilience. Independent Commission for Aid Impact. But before we go further, it's important to clarify something. The UK is not at war with Russia in the sense of British troops fighting Russians directly on the battlefield. What the UK has done is provide robust support to Ukraine, from training Ukrainian forces, to sending lethal and non-lethal equipment, to pledging billions of pounds in military aid, while also dealing with the diplomatic and economic consequences of Russia's aggression. House of Lords Library. One of the UK's largest contributions has been Operation Interflex, a British Army-led training programme that began in mid-2022. Under this operation, British military instructors have trained tens of thousands of Ukrainian personnel, helping them learn to use Western systems, build battlefield skills, and improve survivability. Ukrainian soldiers trained in the UK have reported feeling significantly more prepared because of this training. National Audit Office now +1. Britain's military support isn't limited to training. The UK has directly supplied equipment, donated weapons from British stockpiles, and helped coordinate logistics with allies. Between 2022 and early 2025, the UK committed around £7.8 billion just in direct military support. It also had to spend nearly £2.71 billion replacing equipment donated to Ukraine so that its own readiness wouldn't be dangerously depleted. National Audit Office now. Those are massive numbers, and they matter because military spending isn't just about what you send, it's also about what you retain for your own defense. Globally, major powers budget differently based on strategic priorities, and in 2024, the UK spent around 2.2% of its GDP on defense, a level that meets, but barely exceeds, NATO's minimum guideline. Statista.com +1. This brings us to the question of military power itself, not just what the UK is doing, but how strong the UK's military is compared to Russia's. Russia's armed forces are among the largest in the world. Since the start of the full-scale invasion, Moscow has drastically increased defense spending, reportedly spending several times more of its GDP on the military than the UK does. Critics of UK defense policy have pointed out that Russia spends around 3 times the share of GDP compared to Britain. GB News. On paper, Russia's numerical advantage is clear: a larger army, more tanks, and a bigger stockpile of various weapons. But raw numbers don't tell the full story, especially in modern conflict. Russia's military has struggled with logistics, morale, and the effectiveness of its command structure in Ukraine, leading many analysts to question its reputation as a superpower force. Reddit. At the same time, the UK and other NATO supporters have boosted Ukrainian capability through training, tactical advice, and highly advanced weapon systems, including air defense systems and precision strike weapons. This has allowed Ukrainian forces to effectively counter many Russian advances, negating some of Russia's numerical superiority. However, when comparing the UK military with Russia's forces at the strategic level, one thing becomes clear: the UK has world-class capabilities, but they're limited in scale. The British Army, for example, has around 70,000 combat-ready personnel, a fraction of Russia's ground force. OPB. This limited size has consequences. UK military leaders have warned publicly that, if UK forces were ever asked to combat a major power like Russia directly in Europe, they simply don't have the manpower and stockpiles to sustain a high-intensity war without very rapid expansion and resupply. Even senior MPs have said the British Army can field only one understrength division, which starkly illustrates how stretched resources are. Reddit. And that's before you consider specific threats. In recent weeks, defense analysts have raised concerns about the capabilities of Russian hypersonic missiles like the Zircon, which could theoretically threaten surface fleets, including the Royal Navy, in a conflict scenario. Russian leadership has touted these systems as invincible, creating strategic pressure on NATO navies to improve missile defense. The Sun.ie. So the picture is mixed. The UK has high-quality technology and world-class units like its Royal Air Force and Royal Navy, but comparatively fewer boots on the ground, fewer tanks, and fewer artillery systems than Russia, especially when Russia is in full war mode. That's something planners in London and Brussels are constantly thinking about. Let's talk about costs in more detail, not just what the UK spends on Ukraine, but what it costs to maintain a credible military posture in a period of great power competition. As we've seen, UK defense spending is around 2.2–2.5% of GDP, depending on the year and how you calculate it. That's roughly £70 billion annually in actual defense expenditure. Analysts have warned, though, that this level of spending barely maintains current commitments, and may even fall short of what's needed to modernize equipment, expand munitions production, and meet NATO expectations. TheTimes.com. In fact, Britain's military leaders have flagged a £28 billion funding shortfall over the next 4 years, threatening planned projects like new armoured vehicles and other capabilities. This funding squeeze comes as the UK balances pressures at home, the costs of living, public services like healthcare, and a struggling economy, against pressures abroad. TheTimes.com. To address some of those concerns, the UK government has proposed raising defence spending further, dedicating billions to munitions production, new submarines, cyber defence, and next-generation aircraft. Some plans call for spending up to 3% of GDP or more in the next decade to modernise the force, though Parliament has yet to approve all of these proposals. OPB. If you look at what the money buys, you begin to understand the trade-offs. High-technology fighters, aircraft carriers, submarines, and munitions are enormously expensive to develop and maintain. Advanced weapons like the UK's new long-range missiles, cyber systems, and electronic warfare tools cost much more per unit than simpler systems. This means that with the same budget the UK buys fewer items, but often ones of much higher quality. Russia, on the other hand, has tended to buy or produce mass quantity, lower per unit cost systems, not always effective, but numerous. Reddit. There's also the industrial cost of giving away equipment. When the UK donates tanks or other heavy weapons to Ukraine, It must then spend money to replace them, often at higher cost, because new, modern systems are more expensive than the older ones donated. That cycle drives military spending even higher. National Audit Office now. In terms of performance, the British military has shown strengths in training, interoperability, logistics, and technology transfer with allies. Its ability to coordinate complex support with the United States, Germany, Poland, and others has been a key part of Ukraine's defensive success. The UK also provides intelligence, strategic advice, and integration of systems that help Ukraine's forces operate more effectively on the battlefield. But there are weaknesses too. Manpower levels are low compared to Russia's, and UK forces are not structured for sustained heavy combat against a large mechanized army outside of NATO collective defense. NATO heavily relies on the US for the largest share of heavy artillery, air power, and logistics. The UK contributes but cannot fill that gap alone. Sky News. There have also been notable diplomatic and operational tensions. For example, incidents at sea, such as the British destroyer HMS Defender navigating the Black Sea near Crimea and being confronted by Russian forces in 2021, highlight how close the UK and Russia have come to real conflict in recent years, even before the 2022 invasion. Wikipedia. So as we look at the big picture, how should we summarize all of this? Britain's support for Ukraine is significant and ongoing, involving billions of pounds in aid, tens of thousands of Ukrainian soldiers trained domestically, and close coordination with NATO allies. This support has helped blunt Russian advances and modernize Ukraine's defense capabilities. House of Lords Library. At the same time, the UK's own military power, while technologically advanced, is relatively small and strained when compared to Russia's war economy and manpower. Budget shortfalls, aging equipment in some areas, and strategic choices about future weapons all shape how effective the UK can be in future high-intensity conflicts. TheTimes.com. The economic costs of war ripple far beyond just military spending. The UK has faced rising energy costs, supply chain disruptions, and inflationary pressures linked to the war and sanctions on Russian energy exports. Millions across Europe have felt these effects in their daily lives. Reddit. Looking forward, analysts say that if Russia and Ukraine eventually reach a ceasefire or negotiated peace, the UK and its allies will need to help win the peace. That means helping rebuild Ukraine's infrastructure, economy, and society. That will extend the costs well beyond the battlefield. Independent Commission for Aid Impact. Yet despite the challenges, the war in Ukraine has re-energized Western defense thinking. It's shown the importance of interoperability, rapid deployment, advanced technology like precision weapons and defense networks, and most importantly, the will to support allies in crisis. NATO has responded by enhancing rapid reaction forces and renewing focus on collective defense, especially in Eastern Europe. In closing, the war in Ukraine isn't just a conflict between Moscow and Kyiv. It's a strategic inflection point that has reshaped Europe's defense priorities, tested Britain's military, and raised profound questions about global security in the 21st century. The UK's role has been one of committed partnership with Ukraine and NATO, even while grappling with budget constraints and strategic reassessments. Russia's larger military might be numerically superior, but Russia's operational challenges coupled with Western support for Ukraine show that quality, coordination, and economic resilience also matter in modern war. Thank you for watching. If you found this breakdown helpful, don't forget to like and subscribe, and let me know in the comments what angles you want covered next.